Hey guys, how's it going, dude? Here I am back with another video, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the despicable Lacey Spears. She killed her child. This is all about Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Before we get into this case, I just want to say, if you'd like to support me as a creator, the best way to do that is to like, share, and subscribe. So, if by the end of this video you think, you know what, I enjoyed that and I want to subscribe to this guy, then please feel free. Also, I want to give a shout out to my patron of the day, Rachel Khan. If you would like to have a chance to be the patron of the day and you would like to become a patron and support me for as little as £1 a month with lots of bonus content, go over to my Patreon. The link is down below. Okay, Lacey Spears, 2008, she fell pregnant with her son Garnet Paul Thomas Spears. Now, there was a bit of a strange mystery surrounding the father of Garnet, which we will get into later on in the video. Now, at only 9 days of age, Garnet became incredibly ill. This would be a recurring factor in Garnet's very short life. Hospital admissions, mystery illnesses, causes that defied logic, until his tragic death. All the while, Lacey Spears was documenting this journey, and it garnered attention that Lacey craved. And this, in theory, is what led to a vicious cycle of essentially torture, certainly neglect of her son Garnet, because it got her the attention that she so desperately wanted. Her Blogspot website, her Facebook, her Twitter, her social medias were all places that garnered great sympathy and support from total strangers around the world. In pictures of Garnet, he would come across as so happy despite the horrendous treatment that was going on behind the scenes. So as I said, after just 9 days, Garnet was already hospitalized with strange symptoms: high fevers, ear infections, convulsions, gastrointestinal issues, the cause of which the doctors were incredibly puzzled by. Garnet was admitted to hospital once again when his mother said that he couldn't eat properly and would vomit consistently. Apparently he was constantly losing weight, and Lacey just didn't know what to do. Now, at Lacey's request, Garnet underwent his first surgery to have a feeding tube inserted into his stomach. Now, despite this feeding tube being inserted into Garnet, the same complaint came up time and time again by Lacey, that he wasn't eating and that he couldn't keep any food down. So another surgery took place, an incredibly invasive surgery that would stop Garnet from being able to be sick. Now, the logic behind this was that, Lacey was then able to feed Garnet without him regurgitating the food. By 2010, Lacey moved herself and her son from Alabama over to Florida to be with her grandmother. Now, whilst living in Florida, Lacey heard of a community called the Fellowship Community, and the thought process, the logic behind this community was it was for elderly and disabled people, and basically if you went there you would help care for them in exchange for a roof over your head, for food, and for education for your children. So it was kind of like a give and take community. Garnet was 3 years old by this point, and by all accounts it seems that in the tragically short 5 years he was on this earth, it was around this time with the community that it was probably his happiest time. Now, Garnet made many friends whilst in this community, and one of the families took their children and Garnet out for a picnic, and obviously they knew of Garnet's eating issues, his feeding tube, etc. And so they did have slight reservations and concerns that, Garnet maybe wasn't going to eat the lunch or have difficulty eating what they had prepared for him. But obviously they weren't going to take offense to that because he has a condition, right? And yet when this food was presented to Garnet, he ate it incredibly quickly, almost like he had been starved. And he had no issue in eating the food. In fact, he was so hungry and ate it so quickly, he asked for a second serving. Now, this obviously raised questions because his eating almost came across as like desperation. And there was no issue with him eating. So what's going on here? Because he shouldn't be able to eat so easily if the stories about him that Lacey had told everyone was to be believed. So something isn't quite right. So this raised a lot of questions about Lacey, about Garnet, about Garnet's father, who, if you were to look at the blogs online and listen to Lacey, Garnet's father was a police officer named Blake, who tragically died in a car accident. And Blake was apparently engaged to Lacey at the time of the accident. Now, these stories can be seen, as I said, documented on her blogspot and all over social media, Twitter, etc. Now, what is interesting is that Blake does exist. It's a real person. Blake knew of Lacey. They actually went on a few dates, but they never once had sex. They were never officially together. And in fact, Garnet's father was one of Lacey's neighbors, of whom had casual sexual relations with from time to time. And his name was Chris. And he even thought to himself, I'm pretty sure that's my son. And wanted to be part of Garnet's life. He's raising another child and is fully a part of that child's life, so he would have no issue whatsoever with being in Garnet's life. However, Lacey would scream at him to stay away, fed him lies to make him believe that Garnet was not his. However, by all accounts, although it's not technically confirmed, but by all accounts and logic, this neighbor was in fact Garnet's father, not the fictitious dead police officer. But that would all come falling down very, very soon, which you will hear in just a second. I've jumped the gun a little bit, but I think it's important to know that, you know, Lacey is just full of shit. In January of 2014, Garnet would be hospitalized once more. Now, this was for high fever. He had a severe headache. Now, after a few hours, his symptoms of, the headache and the temperature would go down, so he'd be sent home. But a few days later, he would be back in the hospital. But this time, as well as all the previous symptoms, he would be having convulsions, or so Lacey said. But the hospital, of course, monitored Garnet's brain, and the whole time he was being monitored, 0 seizures. Now, the following day, still in hospital, Garnet has massively painful stomach aches. He tries to vomit, however, of course, because of the previous operation that he has had, he is unable to, and eventually he stops breathing. So they take his sodium levels. Now, I'm not sure about the measurements, but when he arrived at the hospital, his sodium levels were 138 of insert measurement here, right? Whilst he was at the hospital, it went from 138 to 182. Now, that is not naturally possible. Biologically, it is impossible for your sodium levels to go from 138 to 182 unless you have been given sodium. Now, of course, the hospital are not going to give this kid sodium, right? Certainly not an amount of sodium that would lead to his death. 182 would kill someone. However, fortunately, he was able to be stabilized, and then he was sent to a specialist hospital. So in this specialist hospital, Garnet is being monitored because, we don't want him having any seizures or anything like that. And so there is CCTV in the room. Now, his mother, Lacey, agreed to this, agreed to be filmed, and all the rest of it was all above board. She was sleeping in the room with him. She was watching him. She was washing him. She was being a great mother. right? And everything was on the mend. Garnett was on the road to recovery, and he was actually going to be discharged in just a few days of being in that hospital. And then everything went horrifically wrong. Now, what is the difference between him being on the mend, on CCTV, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, things are going horribly wrong? Well, there is no security footage, cameras rolling in the bathroom, because of course that would be incredibly invasive now, wouldn't it? So what Lacey did 10 minutes after the nurse visited Garnett was she took him into the ensuite bathroom where there was no CCTV, and she administered the sodium into his feeding tube, into him, and it proved too much for his little body. His brain began to swell, his body stopped responding to any of the treatments, and he was put onto life support. Now, of course, the doctors instantly knew. In fact, often they were a bit suspicious of Munchausen syndrome from the get-go, but obviously needed solid proof. But this was the solid proof they needed, because it was not naturally biologically possible for this kid to have that much sodium in his body whilst being monitored in a hospital, knowing that none of the staff would be administering such high levels of sodium, if any, to Garnett. So it must have been the mother, and of course it was. And this led the doctors to call the police, and this is where it all fell apart completely. Meanwhile, by the way, whilst her child is fighting for his life on life support, she's on Facebook and social media, asking for prayers and energy to help keep Garnett alive, knowing full well that probably an hour earlier she administered the sodium to kill her own child. So the police split their efforts in two. One to go and search the house for any evidence, and the other to obviously, question people like Lacey. And whilst they're talking to Lacey in the hospital, Garnett's grandfather arrives, and the policeman is just doing general chit-chat, and, obviously Lacey's told the police about Garnett's father, Blake, and so the police says to Garnett's grandfather, sorry about, the loss of the boy's father, Blake, to which the grandfather says, who is Blake? And then from there tells the police that, the father is Chris Hill, the neighbour of the family, who had like this on-off sexual relationship with Lacey. And so obviously the police are now like, well, that's a bit of a weird thing to lie about now, isn't it? So what else is she lying about? Probably quite a lot. So meanwhile, the other police are searching her house, and they do find several bottles of medicine that is, for Garnett. And then alongside the medicine, they find a can of salt. Now, Lacey always claimed that, Garnett was still on breast milk even at the age of 5. And in the bin of her house, they did find, pouches of white liquid, which, they assumed would be the breast milk that she was feeding him. But obviously they didn't test this initially, so they didn't really see any cause for concern, even though there was a giant can of salt in the house. But anyway, it was next to the medicine, but I guess that could have been used to put on French fries, who knows. So anyway, it took the testimony of a neighbor, because Lacey apparently asked her neighbor to go into her house and dispose of any of the liquids used to feed Garnett, which is obviously a bit strange, almost as if to say, I have mixed his food with sodium, which will look very suspicious if it's tested, so please get rid of it. So anyway, the neighbor goes in and finds this specific bag of food that Lacey has asked her to go get, and this really didn't sit well with the neighbor at all. So the neighbor held on to it, and then the neighbor contacted the police, and the neighbor told the police what Lacey had told her to do, and that this is the, bag or pouch of food that she asked me to dispose of. And so they tested it, and after they tested it, it came back with the levels of sodium, the equivalent of having 69 small packets or sachets of salt poured into it. Now, tragically, meanwhile, Garnett passed away. His life support was switched off. He was pronounced dead. So Lacey is arrested and interrogated, and she just puts all of the blame onto the doctors and nurses, saying that it must have been the doctors and nurses. I'm a wonderful, doting mother. How could you accuse me of doing this? When, of course, it was her. But 10 weeks after Garnett's death, a coroner confirmed that it was indeed a homicide. It was not accidental, and the prime suspect was Lacey Spears. On the March 2nd, 2015, Lacey was found guilty of murdering her son. She was sentenced to 20 years minimum in prison. And she was sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York City. Now, she was never formally diagnosed, but it is strongly, obviously, believed that she has Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which the official definition by MedlinePlus.gov is Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a mental illness and a form of child abuse. The caretaker of a child, most often the mother, either makes up fake symptoms or causes real symptoms to make it look like the child is sick, which of course is what Lacey was doing. Now, Lacey has been in prison for many years now. She will continue to be in prison for many years, and apparently she has been abused quite heavily in prison, which I'm sure will garner zero sympathy from anyone in the comments down below. And apparently when she goes to eat in the mess hall with all the other prisoners, they tend to slap salt all over her food, making it inedible because, of course, she poisoned her son with salt. And I think that, she's getting her just desserts. So, yeah, apparently she is constantly abused in prison. And, I mean, if you kill a child, prison is not a nice place for anyone. But for a child killer, oh my, it is quite a ride. And you can just, you can go on her blog spot and just scroll through the hundreds of comments, just people saying that she's a despicable human being, which of course is absolutely correct. All the comments on all of the articles are the same. This woman is disgraceful, should never have been a mother, and that poor little boy deserved so much better. And I hope that Garnett rests in peace. What do you guys think about today's video? What do you think about today's case? What do you think about Munchausen syndrome by proxy? Yeah, just let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. See you again very soon. Sweet one. Geese.